You found it. It's the real news with your host, David Knight.
Anyway, let's go back to 1791. That's when it became law. That was when Virginia ratified it. They were the last ones to ratify it. Why? Because they had opposed the idea of a central government. They believed that it would evolve into a strong, tyrannical government that was as bad or worse than the monarchy they had just left. They were afraid that it would turn into an empire, and they were right. History has proven the anti-federalist right. As a matter of fact, we have a statement from President Eisenhower, who in the halcyon days of the 1950s said in a governor's conference in 1957, he said, "The national government was itself the creature of the states, yet today," 1957, "it is often made to appear that the creature, Frankenstein-like, is determined to destroy the creators." That is absolutely true. I want to give you an example of this from the little despot king, Dan Love, the special agent in charge of the BLM in Nevada and Utah. He was given these kind of dictatorial powers. And the BLM is a great story of bureaucracies out of control. These guys were not even armed until just a couple of decades ago. Then they started carrying just a single firearm on the side. They said, you know, hey, we're out here in this wilderness area. Not many people around here. We've got wild animals. We've got some wild people we might encounter and nobody to back us up. And they think they can get away with it because we're out here alone, and maybe they can get away with it. So we need to have some sidearms. And then they have turned in, though, today into a fully militarized, despotic dictatorship, enforcing unconstitutional laws on people. And the best example of this is what's happened at the Bundy trial. Not only the events leading up to it, but the way that it was conducted. And then we see in the aftermath the trials that are there. We're going to have Sherry Duvally joining us in the next hour, but I want to play for you now the clip from Washington State Representative Matt Shea. And he's talking about some information that was given to him by a Bureau of Land Management whistleblower, talking about the corruption in the BLM, the king of Nevada and Utah, Dan Love. And here's what he has to say. Let's play that first clip.
A very important principle that I would like to start out with of kind of why what I'm about to say is so important to the American people, and it's this. The people of this state, and this comes from Washington State's Public Records Act, the people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies that serve them. The people in delegating authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. People insist on remaining informed so that they may maintain control over the instruments that they have created. And that ultimately is the crux of what I am about to talk about today, since it does involve the Bureau of Land Management. Specifically here in Washington State, the Bureau of Land Management has approximately 435,000 acres under its management. Also, it has many interactions with some of our state agencies and also, obviously, our citizens here in Washington State. One of the very important things to me is that when you are a servant of the government, as we have seen, a servant of the people, as we have seen in recent news stories, you are held to a higher standard because you are a servant of the people, not a servant of the government. That's an important point for what I'm about to talk about. The interesting thing that I have seen over the years is that there has been a flipping of that, where a lot of people that are in the governing authorities have felt like they don't serve the people serve them, and it's just not that way. And so today I would like to
Yeah, so we're going to tell you specifically, this next clip we've got, what he's talking about that came out of that whistleblower. But you hear what he's saying. He's saying essentially the same thing that President Eisenhower said. He said, we created this monster, and now this Frankenstein monster is taking us over and trying to destroy its creator, just as the novel, the monster tried to destroy the doctor who created it. And that's what we've done. We've flipped this upside down. One of the ways that they do this, he basically starts out reading something from the state of Washington, which in a sense was a restatement of the 9th and 10th Amendment, saying we created the federal government. It will be accountable to us. We retain the powers that we did not specifically give the federal government. They do not have any implied power there. And we need to understand the importance of the 10th Amendment, because so many times the things that the government does, the war on drugs and so forth, they say, well, you know, we have this supremacy clause, or we have this commerce clause, or whatever. Well, those clauses were in the main body of the Constitution. And that's one of the reasons why they had a Bill of Rights, because a lot of people, after they created the Constitution, they said, you know, they might use this to give themselves really expansive powers. We need to make sure that doesn't happen. So they gave us the 9th and 10th Amendment to make it very clear that unless they were specifically given powers, that they didn't have those powers. And that was somewhat respected by the government, even into the beginning of the 20th century, when they created a separate amendment to prohibit alcohol, because they didn't have any specific power over alcohol given to them by the states that had created the federal government. The states had retained that power. The states could prohibit alcohol. You know, the states could continue actually to have state-established churches, and they did. Massachusetts had a state church until 1833. That was 42 years after the creation and the ratification of the Bill of Rights. So they continued to have an official state-established church. That's what it meant to have an established religion. People there had to pay taxes to that church. I don't know if they had to attend. In some places, they had to attend the official churches. But Massachusetts had it for another 42 years after the First Amendment was ratified. Connecticut continued their official established state church for another 27 years. So the states had power. The states had, the Bill of Rights was there as a limitation to the federal government's power. But now they have turned this upside down. And as you just heard Matt Shea talk about this, the way they get away with this is to conceal from us what they are doing. When we come back, we're going to play for you what the Bureau of Land Management was trying to conceal from the American people, because all the government agencies are doing this, but you will not believe what they were trying to and continue to try to conceal from the American people. A whistleblower at the BLM has exposed it. Matt Shea is going to break it down when we come back, and we're going to have Sherry Duvally joining us in the next hour as well. That's right. There's nowhere to run to, nowhere to hide. If you don't have the Bill of Rights, if you don't have the basic protections that belong to every human being. As a matter of fact, you can't run from these people. They're living in your house. You think, as I said before, you think the Third Amendment is obsolete, an anachronism, banning the quartering of troops in homes? No, these guys are living with you. They're living on your phone. They're in your pants with you. They're in your pants pocket. They're in everything that you do. They're watching everything that you do. There is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, except they hide everything that they do from you. That's what we were just hearing from Matt Shea. And he was talking about the principles and how important it is for the government to be transparent to the people who created it, the people that it is supposed to serve. But, of course, they have flipped this narrative upside down, just as President Eisenhower warned us, just as the Anti-Federalists warned us when this all happened. They were warning us 226 years ago that this was going to happen, and we were going to have a despotic government, because power is always corrupted, corrupts the individuals. They understood what human nature was, and they had witnessed this in the countries that they had come from. They understood that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. They knew also that power centralizes and concentrates. That's the one thing that they don't talk about, but that was also part of Lord Acton when he talked about that. Power concentrates. And so they were very concerned about the concentration of power. So they wanted to make sure that the states retained political power, that there was a division of power between the states and between the federal government and between the three of them and the people. They wanted to have the House of Representatives. You know, one of the amendments that was originally in the Bill of Rights originally had 17 amendments. Only 12 of those were adopted by the Congress and sent to the various states for ratification. But 2 of those did not make it. And you know what those 2 were? They had to do with the makeup of Congress. They had to do with pay raises for Congress and so forth, but also how many Congress people there would be. They had, in the original First Amendment, which was not ratified, they had a limit on the minimum number of congressmen that there would be. So they had a limit when the number of people were, I think it was like 3 million or something like that. They had a limit as to how many Congress people there would be. There was another limit when they got to 8 million. And then for today, they said, well, once it gets past that, once we get so big that we got 8 million people, we got well over 300 million people today, we would have about 6,000 representatives if we were to go with this. Here's the math. We would have, with 324 million people and a limitation of the number of representatives, you'd have to have one per every 50,000. That would mean we'd have 6,480 members of Congress versus the 435 that we have today. Because they didn't pass that amendment, they passed a law that fixed the number of congressmen to number of House of Representatives to 435. They say, of course, we could never have 6,480 members in Congress. Really? I think it'd be great if we did, because they wouldn't all be able, well, they might be able to meet in a large stadium or something, but they would basically be staying at home in their various districts. And certainly with the internet, it wouldn't be any big deal for them to have a virtual meeting, right? That would not be a problem at all. It would give us a lot more representatives. They would be a lot closer to each of us. They would have a lot less power. There'd be 15 times the number of Congress people that we have today. I think that is an idea whose time should come back, and we should take a look at that again. But when we go back to the representation, understand the real way that they control us and pervert this power paradigm to say that they are in charge of us and not the other way around is to conceal from us what they do. And so I want to play for you the second clip from Matt Shea, where he talks about what has been now exposed by a BLM whistleblower. Here's some of the specifics that have now been learned.
When I reported these issues, my supervisors seemed generally unsurprised and uninterested and was dismissive and seemed unconcerned. Now, I want to set the stage a little bit here. Apparently, Special Agent Wooten was the case agent or the lead investigator for this case. Here's another quote from him. The longer the investigation went on, the more extremely unprofessional, familiar, racy, vulgar, and bias-filled actions, open comments, and inappropriate electronic communications I was made aware of or I personally witnessed, end quote. He then continues, quote, the ridiculousness of the conduct, unprofessional, amateurish, carnival atmosphere, openly made statements, and electronic communications tended to mitigate the defendant's culpability and cast a shadow of doubt, of inexcusable bias, unprofessionalism, and embarrassment on our agency, end quote. This is where it gets very incredible, because Special Agent Wooten brings up some very serious allegations against his own agency, and I want to kind of highlight what those are, and then I would like to go through what specifically is written in this correspondence. First, Special Agent Wooten says that there was the treatment of the Bundys in a manner that suggested they wanted to see a couple members of the Bundy family either dead or harmed. And I want to be very specific about what he said about that.
No question about that.
The second thing that's brought up is that there was an apparent withholding of exculpatory evidence that Mr. Wooten had brought to the attention of his supervisors. Next was that there was allegations of sexual misconduct inside the BLM's law enforcement arm, and that also there were indeed at Bundy Ranch snipers that had been deployed. Now, it's interesting.
That's right. Absolutely. We knew that. We've been telling people that. Many people on the left, if they don't agree with the constitutional positions of the Bundy family, and they were standing on principles, constitutional principles when they did this, they don't really care what the government does to the Bundys. Well, you better care, because they're going to come for you too. If we don't have the basic rule of law, and when we go back and you hear these charges that are coming out of the whistleblower, the BLM, they know that this happened. They know that this happened with Dan Love. He's now been removed. He's had criminal charges put against him. But of course, all the misconduct of the BLM and of Dan Love was kept from the juries, kept from the public. It was the judge concealed it. The BLM concealed it. That's why we've got to have a whistleblower exposing this. They kept all that quiet for quite some time. Some details had leaked out in the prosecution of Dan Love, who has now been removed, but his name cannot be mentioned in the trials, because to do so would expose the criminal actions of people leading the investigation, leading the actions there, just as what happened in Silk Road. They would not allow the jury to know exculpatory evidence that would have basically shown that the defendants were not in charge of the Silk Road website, that they had FBI agents who were subsequently convicted of massive theft that were in control of the website. This kind of corruption is concealed from juries. This kind of corruption, if known, would not convict the people that the government wants to convict. So whether they're liberals who want to see these people go to jail because they don't like what they did, or it's government that wants to see a young man go to jail for running a website and taking Bitcoin because freedom might break out, just like freedom might break out if people realized what was happening to public lands out west. They will do anything to jail these people. Dan Love, he talks about the perversion, the vulgar issues and everything. Of course, he was a guy who demanded air conditioning, special tickets, being treated like a celebrity for Burning Man. That created a bit of that was exposed in the media. He was also later shown to have stolen artifacts and relics and handed them out as favors. He told people to delete evidence. He told other people that he could fix things for them. That's the kind of corruption that will always happen when you create little kings. And we have now little empires. Not just that America is an empire because of all the different places that we have our military, all the different wars that we're running, but we have internal empires. And in many cases, those empires are fighting each other for control. We have the FCC versus the FTC. Who's going to control the internet? Protecting people from drug cartels and gangs like MS-13. That's why we create law enforcement. That's why we create institutions like the FBI. They've been subverted by criminal actions and criminal actors at the top. And the same thing is happening even with the Bureau of Land Management. That's at the center of what was going on in Nevada. Joining us now is Sherry Duvallet of ReadoutNews.com. She has an exclusive interview with Washington State Representative Matt Shea exposing BLM atrocities. This is a letter that was sent to Matt Shea by a BLM whistleblower named Larry Wooten. And I want to talk to Sherry about this article that she has there because it is absolutely amazing the corruption that can happen once somebody gets so much power. That's why we have to have checks and balances. That's why we need to have transparency. You can see what's going on with the FBI. You can see what's going on with the NSA and CIA politically opposing Trump, trying to create a coup. And yet we also can have somebody like Dan Love, who is essentially a king over two states, Utah and Nevada, as the special agent in charge of the BLM law enforcement division there. And this whistleblower, Larry Wooten, talks about many of those abuses that are happening there, and they may cause a mistrial because, Sherry, wasn't it, it was just about a week or so ago that we spoke because the judge there in the Bundy trial dismissed the jury and said, you won't be needed until, I think, what was it, December the 20th or something, if then, she said, and that was the if then part that had everybody saying, ooh, looks like there's going to be maybe a mistrial because of all the things that were concealed and the criminal actions that were concealed by the BLM.
That's exactly what the date that they gave us is December 20th. And apparently this whistleblower letter is a big part of why, this case might just go away. And I'm not sure it'll go away with a mistrial. It's starting to look like a full dismissal.
Wow. And that would mean, when you say dismissal, that would mean that they would not try them again.
Yes, dismissal with prejudice.
Wow. Wow, with prejudice. Wow. So talk a little bit about some of the things that have been exposed. We played a couple of brief clips early in the show from your interview with Matt Shea, but give us a little bit of the landscape here that's exposed in this letter from the BLM whistleblower, Larry Wooten.
Well, he not only exposes Dan Love, and Dan Love has done some very atrocious things, according to Agent Wooten, but he's including other agents, his own supervisor, and even the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're all
So it's very widespread corruption that he's exposing.
Absolutely. It's very widespread, and somebody's going to have to be held accountable for this because it can't just go away.
That's the problem that we always see is how concealed, how the government can work together, how they can conspire to conceal information from the public to continue with these crimes. And it's always up to the good people in the FBI or the good people in the BLM to expose these criminal actions. And frequently, the government then turns on them. Do we know what's the situation with Larry Wooten? Have they come after him for exposing their criminal actions? Because we see that happen typically to whistleblowers.
Well, he brought the information to Acting U.S. Attorney Myrie back in February, and I believe it was the day after he did that he was fired. And he was told that Myrie was furiously demanded that he be removed.
Wow.
You know, he was furious that this man wanted to expose the truth.
Well, that'll be the least that they try to do to him, but that's why we need to get his name out, why we need to thank him about this. One of the things that he said about Special Agent in Charge Dan Love, who has now been dismissed, and, of course, his crimes were concealed from those who were in the jury, concealed largely from the public. We're now learning some things like the fact that he had a kill book as a trophy. And he bragged about the fact that he had gotten 3 individuals in Utah to commit suicide. I know about the death of Dr. Red. I didn't know about the other 2 individuals. Of course, Dr. Red was a guy who was a altruistic physician in a very rural area. And Dan Love came after him and said, oh, you stole artifacts, and was going to ruin his life and essentially cause the guy to commit suicide.
That was a horrendous case. It was one, a case that, I could never have conceived of. And the thing is part of that case involved Dan Love taking artifacts for himself and passing them out like little gifts of candy.
That's right. So he drives this doctor, again, an altruistic doctor, physician, serving a very small, very rural community that no other doctors typically would go to. He drives him to suicide over these artifacts, and yet he's got these artifacts on his desk. That's one of the things that he was fired for, was taking these things for his own personal use and stealing them. Yes,
and by all accounts, Dr. Red was very beloved in his town. This has continued to haunt not just his family, but the people, his patients, his friends, and the entire community. Because they tried to get him held responsible and accountable, and the courts, I believe it was all the way up to the Ninth Circuit, held that Dan Love had qualified immunity. They can't touch him.
Wonderful Ninth Circuit Court again. Let's talk about a little bit of the details in this letter. One of the things that you quote in your article, your interview with Matt Shea on the BLM atrocities at redoubtnews.com, in the article, he said there was a widespread pattern of bad judgment, lack of discipline, bias, unprofessionalism, misconduct. But then he also goes to say it was likely policy and ethical and legal violations among senior and supervisory staff at the BLM's Office of Law Enforcement. He said there was that they had often committed, law enforcement had often committed, their supervisors and potential witnesses and investigative team supervisors had often committed these crimes. Tell us a little bit about some of the crimes that he was referring to.
Let me...
I know that they had said, he quoted one of the statements of one of these individuals, go out there and kick Cliven Bundy in the mouth or the teeth and take his cattle. I need you to get the troops fired up to go get those cowboys, not take any crap from anyone. I mean, they wanted to provoke violence, and in fact, they did provoke violence, and they did have snipers who were training their weapons on individuals.
Yeah.
That was something that came out in the recent trials. They denied that all along. We knew that. We had reported that. But, of course, the public did not believe what we told them. Hopefully now they will believe these documents, believe the judge, believe the whistleblower.
Yes. And, again, it wasn't just Dan Love doing all of this.
That's right.
And that's what people need to understand. A lot of people I hear are just continuing to point their finger at Love, and which they do need to do. He does need to be held accountable, but it wasn't just him. He was being encouraged almost. He was doing these things, and they were protecting him, allowing him to do it, and saying that he's untouchable.
That's right. They called him in his whistleblower thing. He says the BLM OLE's director's boy. They were going to hide and protect him. So this is systemic. When we talk about a situation where there's excessive use of force or somebody is killed, like we talked about in this instance of the most recent one of the man crawling on his hands and knees to the Arizona cop saying, please don't kill me, and the guy kills him.
Right.
when we talk about that and the fact that they get away with it, we say, well, they have now owned, as a system, they have now owned that because the prosecutor didn't want to get a conviction on that police officer. They'll have to get justice if they get justice in a civil trial. But they are protecting their guy there. And it's also, as we move to the trial stage, you also had one of the prosecutors there, Stephen Myrie, that was also complicit in this. I mean, he names individuals that are involved in this.
Yes, he does. And the most important part about Mr. Myrie is the fact that when the U.S. Attorney Daniel Bogdan got removed from his post, Stephen Myrie took his place. He is the acting U.S. Attorney for the entire district.
That's right. So this goes very high. So it's this corruption is vertical, and this corruption is horizontal. It goes from some of the lower level agents all the way up to the very top, and it goes between different jurisdictions. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're talking to Sherry Duvallee. Welcome back. I'm David Knight. We're talking to Sherry Duvallee of Redoubt News. She's been covering the Bundy trial in great detail. As we reported a couple of weeks ago, the judge there was concerned about the lies and the cover-ups of the federal government, not just the BLM, but other agencies were involved in that. They had a private meeting. She dismissed the jury until December the 22nd and then said you won't be needed until December the 20th and said you will not be needed until then, if we need you. So people start saying, well, this may be a mistrial. But now Sherry Duvallee said there's talk that there may be a dismissal, which means that there would not be a retrial. There may be a dismissal and with prejudice. And I think that is very key. One of the things that's kept the Bundy family locked up for a couple of years is the threat assessment report that said that these guys were the aggressors. And now we realize that it was exactly the opposite. It was the corrupt BLM law enforcement officers led by Dan Love who were the aggressors. And then the Justice Department embraced this and went into a persecution of them in the legal system. So joining us now is Sherry Duvallee. We got one more segment here, Sherry. I'll turn this over to you to tell people what you think about these latest developments.
I think everybody needs to read these documents. The world needs to be aware of how our Justice Department is treating the people of this country.
That's right. Because this is not limited to one family. This is not limited to one political perspective. They will do this to come after anybody. And as I've pointed out before, we've seen this numerous times. We've seen it with the Silk Road case and the multiple life sentences that were given to Ross Ulbricht for running a website and accepting Bitcoin. I mean, that's really what they were upset about, the fact that things were out of their control. They didn't want liberty to break out there, and they didn't want liberty to break out on Western lands either, or even to recognize long-established property rights that were out there.
Yeah, that's a big issue in the West. Another case you might want to remind everybody of is the case of the death of Lavoy Finicum.
Yes. Because when we look at all these things saying that they wanted to harm members of the Bundy family or kill them, that's what they did with Lavoy Finicum, and they nearly did it with Ryan Bundy as well.
Yes, and the kill list, apparently, there seems to be a longer kill list. They do mention in this whistleblower letter pictures of Cliven Bundy and Eric Parker with big X's through their faces, showing extreme prejudice, which generally means take them out.
Wow.
But that, in this case, it doesn't say that. It just has the big X's.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's interesting.
They sent pictures of that around, but you don't find pictures of that. They're subject to FOIA, but nobody's got copies of them. So what happened to those?
Yeah, kind of like Hillary Clinton's emails, right? They always seem to disappear because there's so many people involved in this corruption. If it was only one individual, then yeah, you would be able to get those, or if it's just a few people. But what that tells us is how widespread the corruption there is, as we're seeing how widespread the corruption in Washington is.
Yes, and it is amazing that we had an elected official, Matt Shea, willing to come out and break this story just to help the people of this country. That's his sole motivation, is to look out for his constituents and get the truth out there.
That is a heroic act. And, of course, also would say for Agent Wooten of the BLM to put that out there.
Well, he
And we have seen this before.
growing.
All whistleblowers, they understand what this is truly about, the threats to them, just as we've seen John Kiriakou, who blew the whistle on CIA torture.
Yeah, and we do have whistleblower protection laws in this country that they are also throwing out the window.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, along with the Bill of Rights that they threw out as well. Well, thank you so much for joining us at the last minute, always with breaking news. Sherry Duvall talking about the fact that this now may be a dismissal with prejudice because they were very prejudiced in what they did. Thank you so much for joining us, Sherry. We'll be right back.
Donald J. Trump is now president of the United States. Whenever you want to have a debate with a fake liberal that always resorts to violence,
We need to wake people up.
In ancient times, man roamed the earth in a constant state of hunting or being hunted. Introducing Caveman, where cutting-edge science meets ancient super nutrients. Secure your bottle right now at InfoWarsStore.com.